Enlightenment is about our relationship with the world. It's about optimizing this relationship to the ultimate degree. This is what enlightenment practice is about. In order to develop this relationship, we need to develop our insight into the nature of the world and the nature of ourselves. Our understanding of the world, our understanding of ourselves, is determined by our beliefs about the nature of the world, our beliefs about the nature of ourselves. These beliefs can be limiting, or they can be relatively liberating. The next verse, verse 20, talks about a personal soul. Buddhists do not believe in a personal soul. They're often described as atheist as well. Buddhism is described as an atheist religion, which isn't quite accurate, because there are many gods in Buddhism, including a creator god. It's just that Buddhists do not buy into the idea of a first cause that brought anything into being. This first cause could be God in the Abrahamic sense of Jehovah or Allah, or it could be a first cause in terms of a Big Bang. Buddhists don't buy into the belief in a first cause. So these are two distinctive things here. Hindus don't really believe in a first cause either, although they probably would say they believe in a personal soul. This is what gets reborn, life after life after life, until liberation is achieved. But Buddhists would differentiate themselves from Hindus by denying the existence of a personal soul. But the peculiar thing is, Buddhists also believe in many lives, life after life after life, until liberation is achieved. So how is this possible if there's no such thing as a personal soul? What is it that's getting reborn and so on? The point here is that it's second nature for the Indian to assume that there have been many lives, that this life that we're experiencing now is one of an infinite succession of lives. And the whole point of spirituality is to get out of this, to break free of this otherwise interminable procession of lives. I think it's reasonable to assume that this is why you have the whole doctrine of enlightenment. This is why it arose in India, because this understanding of a succession of lives comes natural to the Indian psyche. Now, if you're a modern Westerner, what are you to make of this? Are we to start believing in past lives, in reincarnation? Well, I'm not going to suggest you do that. We have a bit of a history of people that believe in past lives in the West. It tends to be of a somewhat batty nature. We like to know who we were in our past life. Perhaps a Red Indian or an Egyptian princess or something along these lines. So no, let's not go down there. Let's not go down that path. What we need to do, though, is examine our own beliefs about who we are and the nature of our life. What we need to do, though, is honestly examine where we stand in this matter. It's not a question of accepting a belief or not. what we want to look into is the limiting nature of the beliefs that we hold. So if you're a modern Westerner, you should say, well, there's no evidence for past lives. So if there's no evidence for it, we're not going to go along with it. Which is fair enough, isn't it? If you look into the matter, though, you'll find that there are some quite impressive case studies which seem to indicate a strong possibility that a certain individual has lived at a previous time. But these are the exceptions rather than the norm. As it appears to us, there's no objective evidence for the existence of our past lives. There's no objective evidence to indicate that we have lived previously. So what do we believe then? And is what we believe actually more sensible? Let's look at this. We believe that we were born at a certain time on a certain day. Our date of birth, our date and time of birth. So before that point, we didn't exist. And after that point, we exist. That's simple and straightforward, isn't it? But it's a bit of a fairy tale in itself, isn't it? How is this date and time of birth determined? Is it when the umbilical cord is cut? Is it when we're drawn or pushed from our mother's womb? Is it at the point of conception? You could make a valid case for saying that each of these is our time of birth. Although some people might argue you're not really a proper individual until you become self-aware, which can take a few years. But you clearly exist as something at that point, up to that point, don't you? And what about the genetic material that you consist of? Aren't you a product of your parents? We have a longing, a yearning to reach back, to identify our roots. Genealogy is very popular in the West. We like to know who our ancestors were, what our roots are. And we can even look to evolution to find that we share a common ancestry, not only with other creatures like the fish and the apes and so on, but also with the trees. At some point in our evolutionary history, we merge with trees. So this is quite nice. And some people will even say, well, it goes back further than that. Our atoms were born of the dust between stars. The atoms of which our body is composed have been around since near the beginning of the universe. Although I suppose you could argue the stuff that's made up, the stuff that the atoms consist of, has been around since the point of the Big Bang, the so-called Big Bang. So we are in essence as old as the universe. But this is all a little bit roundabout and desperate. It's not giving us the same context that the Indian psyche seems to have. This sense, not only that you've been around since the beginning of the universe, but in previous universes. The Indian mind seems to naturally intuit that we are part of the universal process. We have always been around. There has never been a point where we were not. And I suggested earlier that this understanding is what gave rise to the possibility of enlightenment in India. And the importance of this understanding is given by the fact that the very first thing that the Buddha did on his enlightenment was to recall all his past lives. In fact, I'll read out the text here. I've actually covered this before in the series of videos on the Yoga Vasishtha, but I'm going to take a different angle on it this time. So this is in Bhikkhu Nyanamoli's book, which consists of quotes from canonical texts from the early body of scriptures known as the Pali Canon. And this is taken from a particular collection of sutras called the Majjhima Nikaya, or the collection of middle-length sayings. The early teachings of the Buddha were categorized according to how long they were. So here's what the Buddha did on his enlightenment. This is taken from page 23 of Bhikkhu Nyanamoli's book. When my concentrated mind was thus purified, bright, unblemished, and rid of imperfection, when it had become malleable, wieldy, steady, and attained to imperturbability, I inclined my mind to the knowledge of recollection of past life. So this is the first thing the Buddha did on his enlightenment. This is the first of his so-called three knowledges. There were three knowledges. This is the first one. I'll mention the other two shortly. I recollected my manifold past life, that is to say, 1 birth, 2, 3, 4, 5 births, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 births, 100 births, 1,000 births, 100,000 births, many ages of world contraction, many ages of world expansion, many ages of world contraction and expansion. I was there so named of such a race, with such an appearance, such food, such experience of pleasure and pain, such a life term, and passing away thence I reappeared elsewhere. And there too I was so named of such a race, with such an appearance, such experience of pleasure and pain, such a life term, passing away thence I reappeared here. Thus with details and particulars I recollected my manifold past life. This was the first true knowledge attained by me in the first watch of the night. So, what are we to make of this? Can we test our enlightenment by our ability to remember our past lives? It's clearly a very important thing. Otherwise, why did the Buddha do this on his enlightenment? And the thing is, there's a few things here which don't quite add up. How long would it take the Buddha to remember 100,000 lives? And that was just the beginning of it. That was just in this universe. There were previous universes. And there was no beginning. So basically he's saying he remembered an infinite number of lives. And this would take an infinite amount of time, wouldn't it? He remembered the details of these lives. What he ate, what his name was, and so on. This would take rather a long time, wouldn't it? Another point is, on occasion the Buddha spoke about his past lives. But the peculiar thing is, they all took place in a contemporary milieu. They all took place in the India of his day. People had similar names, similar occupations. He didn't describe his experience as a Siberian shaman, for example, or an Australian Aborigine, or a Celtic Druid. No, they all took place. Doesn't matter what universe it was. It was all in contemporary India. So what's the Buddha on about here? And how did he know these lives were objectively correct? Perhaps there are some false memories there. Perhaps this is just creative imagining going on, or a way of expressing certain inclinations, certain notions, certain feelings in terms of a past life. I find it quite a nice way of thinking, to think of a past life. I sometimes imagine myself to have been a monk of some kind, or a scientist, a Newtonian scientist, or an aristocrat of some sort. It kind of fits in with my own self-image, my own psychology. So is this just fanciful thinking? Could the Buddha be mistaken that these weren't past lives he was talking about, that he was remembering? And whether it was or not, why does he mention this now? Well, there's a bit of a clue here. I'll read a bit about the second knowledge he obtained. When my concentrated mind was thus purified, and so on, I inclined my mind to the knowledge of the passing away and the reappearance of creatures. I saw creatures passing away and reappearing, inferior and superior, fair and ugly, happy and unhappy in their destinations. I understood how creatures pass on according to their actions. These worthy creatures, who were ill conducted in body, speech and mind, I'll miss out a little bit, on the dissolution of the body after death, have reappeared in states of privation, in an unhappy destination, in perdition, even in hell. But these worthy creatures, don't miss out this next bit, on the dissolution of the body after death, have reappeared in a happy destination, even in a heavenly world. So this is a traditional belief that you get reborn according to your actions. And this is what the Buddha saw. It's described here as seeing it with a divine eye, with the divine eye. So that was the second knowledge. He saw the fate of all creatures as they pass away and are reborn according to their past karma. And the third true knowledge was the knowledge which leads to the end of suffering, sometimes called the Four Noble Truths. He saw the truth of suffering, the cause of suffering, and that this cause of suffering can be removed. He saw the way to remove this suffering. That was the third knowledge. So these are the three knowledges of the Buddha. So what's this all about then? What is this thing about all these past lives all about? Well, this is the grand perspective. The grand process. In the first two knowledges, the Buddha was seeing all that could be seen. He was reviewing the situation in toto, in its totality. And having done so, he could see what was wrong and what needed to be done. So I would say these first two knowledges are the context. We have to blow open our limited notions of ourself and understand on whatever level possible that we are infinite processes. We're not a little individual that pops into existence at one point, wanders around a bit, either creates some mischief or just gets on as best as they can and then pops off. That's not much of a self-image, is it? So as a Westerner, if it helps you to think in terms of your ancestors and your genetic inheritance, if it helps you to think in terms of evolution, if it helps you to think in terms of cosmology and our connection with the universe, okay, that's a start. But you want to get a sense of it. You want to get a sense of your own eternal process, which I think you probably have already, but you cover it up with this limited understanding of an individual that was born at a certain time on a certain day, and that's it. We need the grandest possible perspective on this. We need a sense of this perspective, which is what the first two knowledges of the Buddha give us. We need this understanding, this sense of intimacy with universal cosmic process to properly appreciate the nature of our situation, to properly appreciate our relationship with the universe. We also need this understanding in order to properly appreciate the next verse in the Sagatakam, which is verse 20. And we also need this perspective and quite a few of the verses after that. So even if we can't tune into this perspective, at least let's be aware of the rather limited nature of our own perspective and stop reinforcing it, stop believing that you came into existence at a particular date and a particular time. That's actually more absurd than believing in reincarnation. It's not just that you were cutting yourself off from your mother's womb when that umbilical cord was cut. You're cutting yourself off from the whole universe, which is totally absurd. Your umbilical cord with the universe is very much intact. Let's get back in touch with it.